good morning, I think it still might be for you, or just afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Great that you can hear us. We can hear and see you, so we're all set. I'm joined by Oriane Georgeac, who is Assistant Professor at Boston University. Oriane's research interests focus on how people respond to organizational messages about diversity. As part of this, she investigated the effects of organizations' justifications for why they value diversity. This research shows that organizations' efforts to support diversity might paradoxically prevent them from advancing towards their diversity goals. I won't say more because I'm sure that Oriane will be telling us more about that. But of course, the theme of today being content with a positive brain print, a commercial no-brainer, and all about kind of the business need for acting on sustainability, we thought this would be quite an interesting angle and maybe a bit of a challenging session to end on. Oriane got her PhD from London Business School and worked at Yale University School of Management, and her work has won multiple awards and has been covered by a variety of media outlets, including the Harvard Business Review, Forbes, The Economist, The Telegraph, and The Hill. So Oriane will have around 15 to 20 minutes to speak, and then we'll have a short Q&A to finish. Over to you, Oriane. And unfortunately, we can try to see if you can share your screen, but we don't think it's going to work. So we can try.
Let's give it a try.
We'll give it a try. We apologize. We're not sure why it's not working. Let's see if it can work, and otherwise we're ready to go. Oh, it does work. Well, there you go. I'm happy we tried. Over to you.
Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. I am delighted to be here and to have this opportunity to share with you some of my research, in which one of my co-authors, Anita Redden, who's an associate professor at London Business School, and I actually look at how organizations talk about diversity and at the consequences of what they say about it, in particular for members of underrepresented groups who are hoping to join organizations. And so if I start by telling you that for most organizations today, diversity is still very much an issue, this will hardly be news. And yet we know that an increasing number of organizations publicly voice their commitment for diversity, and often they do so by making a case for it, in which they explain and justify why diversity matters to them. And so I'm interested in these kind of messages that revolve around justifications for diversity. So to give you a little bit more of a sense of the types of messages that I'm interested in, I thought I would share with you an email that I received right around the time that I was starting to wrap up my dissertation at London Business School. And so this email was basically from the 30% Club, which is an advocacy group that promotes women's representation on boards and in senior leadership in organizations. And the email basically contained an invitation to an event to celebrate the launch of a new report about gender diversity. And the title of this report was, "Are You Missing Millions? The Commercial Imperative for Putting a Gender Lens on Your Business." Now, of course, this title may seem a bit extravagant, but what is meaningful about it is its framing of diversity as a business asset. It is this framing that is colloquially called the business case for diversity. And what I'm hoping to show you today is that this framing is hardly unique, but is also highly detrimental to underrepresented group members. So to start, let me give you a little bit of a definition of the business case for diversity. So I define it as a set of arguments that propose that diversity is valuable on the grounds of the benefits that it confers for organizations' performance. And that could be directly or indirectly. So directly, the example would be the classic McKinsey report telling you that more diverse companies actually tend to be more highly performing than non-diverse companies. Indirectly could be arguments such as, well, we value diversity because it increases creativity, or it helps us serve new customer segments that we didn't have access to before, or it allows us to recruit from better talent pools. So all of those arguments fall under the broad umbrella of the business case because it frames diversity as a means to an end, which is increasing organizations' performance. And because it is framed as a means to an end, I characterize the business case as an instrumental diversity rhetoric. And you can see an example of this, for instance, with Google, when they say, we know diversity and inclusion are values critical to our success and future innovation. Now, of course, organizations may also use less economic, more moral arguments and make what I call the fairness case for diversity, which I define as a set of arguments proposing that diversity is valuable just because it's the right thing to do on the grounds of moral principles and social justice. Now, because the fairness case frames diversity as an end in itself, not as a means of improving organizational performance, I characterize it as a non-instrumental diversity rhetoric. And again, you can see an example of this in the real world with a company like Tenet Healthcare, which is part of the Fortune 500, when they say, we embrace diversity because it's our culture and because it's the right thing to do. So given these two types of rhetoric, one more economic, the other more moral, the question that I had was, what are the consequences of these two types of rhetoric, and in particular of the business case, for underrepresented job seekers? And this question seemed all the more important to investigate, as if you pay a little bit of attention to the media, you find the business case everywhere. So I saw it regularly making headlines in the general press, and I also saw it regularly being the subject of numerous official reports on diversity. But this, in a sense, did not really tell me what organizations themselves were saying. And so what I did to investigate this prior to looking at the consequences was to test the prevalence of the business case among the Fortune 500 companies. So to do this, I went on the Fortune 500 companies' websites, and I collected all the text that I could find that was relevant to why diversity mattered to them. And then I built a machine learning algorithm to classify this text into either a business case or a fairness case category. And this is what I found. I found that more than 4 in 5 of the Fortune 500 actually use the business case for diversity when conveying their commitment to diversity. About 1%, sometimes depending on the analysis, up to 5%, but not more than that, can make the fairness case for diversity. And a little bit under 1 in 5 have no case at all, which doesn't mean that they don't talk about diversity, just that they don't justify why diversity matters to them. So given the prevalence of the business case for diversity, I decided to really investigate the consequences of this widespread rhetoric. And so to do so, I focused on a few outcomes that I wanted to get a sense of. So I looked at how the business case for diversity would affect anticipated sense of belonging to a prospective organization among underrepresented job seekers. So anticipated sense of belonging is the degree to which I expect that I will be welcome and valued in a given setting, in this case, in a prospective organization. And the reason why I focused on sense of belonging here is because we know that it's a key predictor of people's willingness to enter new fields and industries. And this is because sense of belonging really captures people's sense that there are good prospects awaiting them there. But we also know from past research that in non-diverse contexts, it is especially difficult for members of underrepresented groups to develop a sense of belonging, because in non-diverse contexts, this salience of their social identity makes them feel a chronic sense of dissimilarity vis-a-vis others, which is the exact opposite of sense of belonging. And so for organizations hoping to become more diverse, it is therefore key to instill early on an anticipated sense of belonging to the company. And so can the business case help them do that, was essentially my question. Now, another consequence that I wanted to investigate was how much the business case would shape underrepresented job seekers' desire to join the company. And finally, I was interested in what is called social identity threat. And this may be a little bit of a mouthful, but it's actually a very well-established and easy to understand concept. It is basically the extent to which I worry about being seen and judged through the lens of the stereotypes that have been traditionally attached to my social identity. So it is essentially, you could think of it as it is my concern about being reduced to my social identity, so my gender, my race, my sexual orientation, and being seen only through that lens by others. So looking at these consequences, we tested the effect of the business case across 5 studies in the context of sexual orientation, gender, and race. So specifically, we recruited LGBTQ plus professionals at a LGBTQ plus focused job fair in London. We recruited women seeking jobs in STEM, and by STEM I mean science, technology, engineering, and math industries. The reason why we looked at women in this context is because we know that they are severely underrepresented in those fields at about only 25% of the population. And finally, we looked at African American students in higher education because they are chronically underrepresented in these academic contexts. So what I did basically was to assign these 1,800 plus participants randomly to read either a business case or a fairness case, because I'm an experimental psychologist by training. So I tend to conduct experimental studies to get at causal effects. And so what I did was to ask participants to imagine that they were looking for a new job in their industry. That was pretty easy. They were pretty much all job seekers. And to imagine that they had come across an organization with an interesting job opening. And that as they browsed the website of the organization, they found the following statement. So again, participants saw only one of the 2, and that statement was randomly assigned. And so in the business case condition, participants saw a statement that said, diversity and inclusion are part of our company's commitment to performance versus commitment to equality in the fairness case condition. Then the statement went on to say, behind this focus is a simple but powerful idea that diversity simply makes good business sense versus is the right thing to do in the fairness case condition. Then each statement went on to develop classic arguments that pertain to each line of argumentation. And it concluded with, in sum, we firmly believe that diversity and inclusion can help our organization meet and exceed our business goals in the business case condition versus foster respect and opportunity for all in the fairness case condition. And I should say that both statements were actually developed based on the rhetoric that we could find on the website of the top 10 STEM companies worldwide. So this was meant to be really representative of what job seekers actually encounter in the real world. So after reading one of these 2 statements, participants completed measures of anticipated sense of belonging, desire to join the company, and social identity threat. And what we found was a strikingly consistent pattern across identities, such that when they read a business case for diversity rather than a fairness case, LGBTQ+, women in STEM, and African American students in higher education actually reported feeling a significantly lower sense of belonging to the prospective organization that had made the case for diversity. So I'm not going to show you the results for all 5 studies, that would be too much, but I'm going to give you 2 examples here. So here you can see the results for the LGBTQ plus study. So what you can see here is that LGBTQ plus professionals who were randomly assigned to read a business case for diversity reported significantly lower anticipated sense of belonging to the prospective organization compared to those who had been randomly assigned to read a fairness case for diversity. And we found the same pattern with job seekers in STEM, where we compared women to men in STEM. And we found that in a slightly different measure of sense of belonging, which was a facet of sense of belonging, which consists in measuring how much I anticipate that I will be rejected in the new settings that I'm considering joining. And so what you can see is that men were virtually unaffected by the type of text that they read. NS here stands for non-significant. So the difference between the 2 bars for men is not statistically meaningful. But women who had been randomly assigned to read a business case rather than a fairness case actually reported fearing significantly more that they would be rejected in the organization when they had read the business case rather than the fairness case. So we found this unambiguous significant effect, negative effect of the business case on sense of belonging across underrepresented groups. We also found that all of these demographic groups reported significantly lower desire to join the company when they had read a business case rather than a fairness case. And in the 4 studies out of 5 where we measured social identity threat, we found that these effects, these detrimental effects on sense of belonging and desire to join the organization, were in fact driven by a greater sense that they would be seen and judged based on the stereotypes that have been associated with their identities in the prospective organization. So essentially, to sum it up, it is because women in STEM and African-American students felt more concerned about the perspective that they would be seen and judged as women or as African Americans, that they felt that they anticipated feeling a lower sense of belonging in the prospective organization, and in turn were less interested in joining it. So this was relevant to the job application phase, but at this point, what we wondered was the following. Could it be that even though the business case undermines the desire of these underrepresented groups to apply to the organization, they might apply nonetheless? And if so, is it possible that the business case might continue to undermine them during their first interactions with the organization, for instance, during a job interview? And so to test this, what we did was to recruit 318 high-achieving, highly trained MBA students at London Business School. And we caught those participants as they were preparing for job interviews in the consulting industry. And this was a particularly interesting setting in which to test the consequences of the business case, because job interviews in consulting consist in case studies. So participants or interviewees are actually asked to try to solve a real world problem that an organization is facing. And they're expected to showcase really high levels of analytical thinking, of problem solving, displaying really good mental math abilities, as well as an ability to take the lead in the interview. So this is not a classic interview where participants just respond to the interviewer's question. They are actually expected to ask good questions that will be key to solving the problem for the organization. So the quality of the questions that they ask and the leadership with which they're able to decide which questions are going to lead them to the solution is one of the performance criteria. Now, interestingly, we also know from research that women are strongly negatively stereotyped in all of these domains, whether it be leadership, mental math, or even analytical thinking. So we thought this was a conducive context in which to test our theory that the business case activates concerns about being seen and judged through stereotypes. So what we did is that we randomly assigned, again, participants to read either a business case or a fairness case at the very beginning of the interview. It took them 2 minutes. And then they put aside the statement that they had read, and the interview started and continued as normal. And then at the end of the interview, what we did was to collect the ratings of performance that interviewers indicated for the interviewee. And I should say that interviewers were actually blind to hypothesis, which is really important because we did not want interviewers to know what we were interested in or to have any idea of the effect that we were pursuing, so that we would ensure that their ratings of performance would be unbiased. So we collected all of these ratings, and here's what we found. We found that for women who had been randomly assigned to a business case, to read a business case, they were rated as having significantly more poorly performed compared to women who had been assigned to read a fairness case. And again, for men, there was no significant difference. So what we can take from this is that the business case paradoxically undermines specifically the groups that it claims to value. And it does so at a key stage, which is the interview, the job interview, which could lead or not to a job offer. Relatedly, what we can see is that in the business case condition, you find a significant gap in performance across men and women, such that women who read a business case significantly underperform relative to men. Now, when you remove this threatening message and you replace it with a fairness case, magically, almost, this performance gap across men and women disappears. This is, again, the NS saying that the difference is not significant. So this really highlights the powerful effect of messages in the context that surrounds job seekers, a powerful effect that can actually significantly shape their performance at a key stage, which is the job interview stage. So in conclusion, what I want to leave you with is this idea that how we explain our commitment to diversity matters, and perhaps more than we realize. The business case for diversity, as I call it, is a little bit of the wolf in sheep's clothing, in the sense that it sounds very positive on the surface, but it actually undermines both members of underrepresented groups and, in turn, organizations' ability to advance towards their diversity goals. In new research, we also find evidence that the business case can actually undermine commitment to diversity among managers who are exposed to it when diversity does not deliver on its promises. So, for instance, when they see a diverse team underperform, whereas they were promised that diverse teams would deliver stronger results, managers tend to really withdraw in terms of their commitment to diversity. And finally, this tells us that it's really important to scientifically test the effects of corporate messages, and to tie it to the theme of this conference, it's not enough to have a positive sounding message. Actually, even a positive sounding message like the business case can be threatening. And so it's really important to try to understand what messages, and even positively sounding messages, the cues that they actually convey to their audiences. So with this, I want to thank you for your attention, and say also that if you're interested in this presentation, I had to be brief, but you can see more details in the Harvard Business Review article called "Stop Making the Business Case for Diversity" that I co-wrote with my co-author, Anissa Rattan. And just 1 second more of your attention to say that we also have another article, which may be very relevant to all of those of you who work in the media, where we looked at a project called the 50-50 Project that took place at the BBC, and that was led by Ross Atkins from the show Outside Source, in which he proposed a way to fight gender underrepresentation on screen. And this is basically a case study of what happened there, and is a fascinating project. And that really highlights the role of data in driving social change in organizations. So I thought I would just mention it, even though this is not really about the talk today, but this may be of interest to you, so you might want to check it out. Thank you so much again for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Oriane. Thank you very much for that incredibly concise yet clear summary of this really interesting research. Amazing that you managed to pack that into about 25 minutes. We've got a couple of minutes for questions, and I'm going to open it straight up to see if there's anyone in the room who has a burning question, because we'll only be able to take a few. And I think Rosie's got her hand up. Go for it, Rosie.
Yeah, I thought that was fascinating. I'm dying to ask loads of questions. I was curious about whether you had delved into why the business case example would be threatening to some groups, and whether you tested any other presentations of the diversity position besides the FAIR example. I guess when I was listening to you, I was thinking, well, actually, another position that a company could take is to say, we don't have the answers on this. Actually, you know, we recognize that this is really difficult. We're not that good at it. You know, we're trying our best. Come be part of the journey. I don't think we hear that narrative very often from companies. Anyway, it's just a thought, but I wondered if you got into kind of how how that might look for even better scores on the test that you performed?
Sure. So to your first question on why the business case is threatening, it's basically this idea that the business case at its core argues that different people from different groups actually have different talents or skills or perspectives or work styles, interaction styles, you name it. But they have something that is different just because of the groups that they belong to. And so in a sense, and it crucially highlights that it is those differences that are going to drive up the company's performance. Quite a bold statement, but this is essentially the gist of it. Now, the issue with this is that the business case in saying this essentially justifies organizations' desire to look at their pool of job applicants, to look at job applicants through the lens of their social identities when they're trying to figure out what it is that they could contribute to the organization. And the problem is that if we switch perspective, let's say, for instance, a woman in STEM, we know that it's really threatening to be seen, for instance, just as a woman, as opposed to the complexity of all of the identities and personality that we may have. And so the idea that you could be judged based on your social identity only because you're expected to contribute something special is known to be a threatening one, because it's very reductory. It reduces all of the wealth of skills that you can contribute to just one aspect, which is your social identity. It's both reductory and it's also really limiting, because you may be willing to contribute other things to the organization, but unfortunately, if those things are not consistent with the stereotypes about their groups, they may not be well received. That's why the business case is threatening to underrepresented groups. The other thing about testing new other messages, that's really interesting. We have tested actually a case that says essentially nothing. So I showed you the breakdown in terms of prevalence, and I showed you that about 20% roughly of organizations do not make any case. So we tested this. It's basically affirming commitment to diversity without any justification for why. And that actually performs really well. So it seems to be the least threatening of all, even less threatening than the fairness case at times. And so what we recommend is basically that you could just convey your commitment to diversity without any justification. And in a sense that could be legitimate, because organizations do not justify, or they don't feel the need to justify other things like the need for innovation, the need for paying attention to your customers, the need for, and so on and so forth. And so why do organizations actually feel the need to justify the value of diversity? That could actually go without saying. And so you could just claim that you are committed to diversity without justifying why, but some organizations sometimes feel they need to say why, and in which case the best option here is, according to our research anyway, is the fairness case for diversity. I hope it answers your question.
Yes, I think Rosie's nodding in the room. I'll see if there's one final question in the room. Yeah, at the front here.
Sorry, I feel like I'm asking too many questions.
Right.
Cindy, independent climate narrative strategist. It's so fascinating, this piece of research, because in a sense, the argument that's always made for climate comms in terms of broadcasting is the commercial imperative, actually because we feel that's what's necessary as a convincer, that being good or it being the right thing to do is not going to be enough for the organizations themselves to justify the change. And so I'm wondering if your research is pointing to a different sort of thing. It's like, what do we value? Do we value making money, or do we have a different set of values which are more moral and ethical, which won't necessarily be able to emerge in a corporate structure?
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. And I think that relates to a question that I'm being asked very often, which is, okay, but you might actually need to make a business case to convince people who are skeptical regarding diversity, to convince them and bring them on board. And this is this other line of research that I have about managers, which suggests that this is sometimes a very short-term perspective on how to bring people on board with diversity. Because yes, in the short term, you can use the business case to make lots of promises about what diversity is going to be able to contribute. But we also know from other research that the link between diversity and performance is tenuous. Yes, diversity on the one hand increases creativity, but on the other hand, it also increases conflict. And so when you sum all of these effects together, what you find is that they tend to cancel out, and the overall effect on performance is not really significant at all. And so essentially, the business case is making promises that are not scientifically backed. And so what happens when inevitably at some point those promises do not materialize? And what I find in preliminary data is that when they don't materialize and people have been promised some of these benefits, well, managers tend to withdraw. They feel a little bit cheated, and they tend to no longer want to engage in diversity initiatives and these kind of things. And so I think, yes, in the short term, it can be tempting to almost sell diversity to get people's buy-in, but in the long term, this is not going to serve people well. And on top of that, it's not scientifically accurate. So I think it's important to consider that at the core, this is not really why we were interested in diversity at all in the first place. Diversity was, since the civil rights movement and the women's liberation movement, was at its core a way to end discrimination, promote equal opportunity, and bring a little bit more of fairness in workplace environments. So I think having the courage to go back to the origins of how diversity came to become a topic and try to push back a little bit on this economic narrative that is both detrimental but also not scientifically backed is actually the more sustainable way to go.
Great. Thank you very much, Oriane. I see Cindy very busily scribbling away there. So thank you for that insightful answer. I think we'll have to wrap it up there just in the interest of time, but thank you so much for joining us from Boston, and speak soon.
Thank you so much, Steve, for having me.
All right. I am now the last person standing between you and drinks, so I'll make this very, very brief. But it's been a really, I think, interesting and insightful day. And I think, what I kind of take away from today is that I think, yes, in many cases, content with a positive brain print also makes commercial sense. Some examples, the fact that Penguin Random House's Lit in Colour initiative is mentioned by so many job applicants from the morning session. The Ipsos poll that 66% of people want more action from media on environment. The success of games with sustainability messages and millions of downloads. The huge opportunity we have as storytellers to contribute to our common purpose, which is to act on climate change. But also, it's not always the right argument, and it's not the only argument. If we're selling newspapers through sexism, maybe we shouldn't do that. And also maybe actually there are other reasons that those newspapers are successful. And actually, in the case of recruiting talent and attracting diverse talent, it doesn't work. So as always, as a consultant, I find myself saying, it depends. I'm not sure if that's a helpful conclusion, but we'll leave it there. So I would like to thank some people before I let you all go. First of all, I'd like to thank the Pearson team, and particularly Frederick, Sandra, and Michael, who have been such gracious hosts. Thank you. I would like to thank our brilliant AV team at the back, Rob leading and on vision, James on sound, and Gary on camera. And then I'd like to thank the RMF team who've all been here today. Yaz on registration, Fanny on registration and on mics, Rosie and Simon on mics and jumping in wherever necessary, but mostly Imogen, who has shouldered the brunt of the load of organizing this conference, from emailing everyone, to finding speakers, to chairing sessions. She's done it all, and it wouldn't have been possible without you, so thank you. And with that, I would invite you all to come back to where we've been having our lunch and coffees and teas to have some drinks.